Hi, welcome back to this Django tutorial series, and in this session we are going to be looking at data and model. I believe that you are familiar with the fundamentals of Django already, how to set it up and so on and so forth. We have a database, and each table of the database is actually called a model, and this model defines the data that you put to it. Now, if you look at this diagram now, you can see frame model, you can see body model, you can see block model, and each of these model have their own columns like ID, absolute magnitude, and so on. This might look complex, but just to give you an overview of what data and model. So now the information that you now insert based on the structure that you have defined for this particular model is now what we call data. Now, without too much discussion, we are going to be looking at it practically. Come to your desktop. What you just need to do is just create a new folder, call it data and model, or anything you feel can. So just like you know that our code editor has been Visual Studio Code, so just drag the folder to your Visual Studio Code, and you are going to be having that. So you can then enlarge it, and yes, I trust. We then open our console. Just go to this place and open your new terminal. Now we have our terminal here. Be sure that you are in that folder, and by just pressing list. Now we don't have anything in the folder at the moment, so the first thing you should do is that you should create and activate your virtual environment. And to create your virtual environment, you might have installed virtual environment, but just to be sure, and just to be sure we're on the same page, just do pip install virtual environment. So this will install the virtual environment, and it's going to be a global installation, but you might have installed this, and if you have installed it, you can just skip that step. And since you have installed the virtual environment, the next thing for this folder now, you should now create a new virtual environment. And to create your virtual environment, just say python module venv, which is the virtual environment, and this next parameter now define the name you want to give to your virtual environment. But for simplicity's sake, I'll still go ahead and name it venv. You can decide to name your own my virtual environment or anything, but I just prefer to just name it VMV so that it's easy for me to relate to it. Now you can see now that you have your virtual environment in that folder. So now that we have our virtual environment in that folder, the next thing to do now is to start the virtual environment. And to start the virtual environment, you just go virtual environment still installing. Okay, now we have it here. So to start your virtual environment, you just say source v the name you call your virtual environment slash script slash activate so you can see now that you have your vmv above, which is to show you that you have been able to activate your virtual environment. So the next thing to do now is to install Django. Don't forget that we are looking at Django, and since you have install your virtual environment, you have started it, now there's a need for you to install Django on that virtual environment, because you don't want to install it globally, so that any changes or any modification you apply to Django in this folder structure or folder directory, it will not be applied to every section of your other Django application. So that's why we are installing it on a separate virtual environment. So we go pip install Django. So that will install Django for us, after which we are going to be creating our Django application. We are going to be creating our Django application, after which we then learn data and model, as this section of the tutorial is dedicated to data and model. So our Django is currently installing, so I'll then pause and come back to continue the tutorial. So now we have our Django installed already. So the next thing now is, since we have installed our Django on that virtual environment, there's a need for us to create our Django application. And to create your Django application, please make sure that your virtual environment is still on. So I'll just clean this. Now make sure that your virtual environment is still indicated here on top. So what you now need to do is you create your Django application. To create your Django application, you go the command Django, admin start project, and you go to your project name. So the project name, I decide to call it coding school. Let's just call it coding school. You can decide to name your project anything depending on what you are working on, but I will decide to name this our project coding school. And don't forget that after you have given your project a name, you should put a dot at the end of the name so that you will not have a subfolder and another subdirectory. So it's better you just go the dots and then press enter, so that will create your Django application. And you can see now that we have our coding school application, which we have some parameters, and I believe that all these files have been explained to you in the previous sections. So we go to the next section now as we create our Django application. Now you have created your project, which is the coding school project. Now each project now have an application. So the next step now is we create our application, which is under the project. So it's just the way Django works. So now to create an application, you go create, you go Django, oh sorry, Python. You can decide to use Python, you can decide to use py, it's the same thing. So manage.py, and we say start app, and you give your application a name. Of course, for a coding school, you can expect to have assessment, you can expect to have student application, you can expect to have maybe authentication, and so on and so forth. But just for this data and model section of the tutorial, let's just focus on managing students, so that we'll be able to relate with, okay, how do we manage our student data, how do we manage our student model. So let's call our application name students, or maybe management student management. So that will be an application under coding school project. So another application can be like the assessment, as I've mentioned earlier. So now that we have created our application, you should not forget that you should register your application project. And under the settings, you should then come to, okay, let me just come now under the settings of your project, because if you don't register the application, then anything you are doing will just be applied to the project. So for anything you are doing to be applied to the application, you need to make it Django realize that, okay, I've created this application, and you should consider it as part of any command that I'm running or anything I'm doing going forward. So to register the application, you come to this installed apps. This installed app, you just put it anywhere. Preferably you can put it as the first, and don't forget the name that we call it student management. All these are just what we have looked at before or previously. So but just to refresh our memory and get us on the same page with what we want to do in this session of the tutorial. Now we come to the main work, which is to creating our model and our data, which is to create our model and data. Okay, so now we are looking at this application, which is the student management. Now you can see that when you look at your student management application, which is application under the coding school project, now you see that we have a file called models. We have a file called models. This is where you define your models. And when we look at model is just In simple term, a database table is just what we can call a model. Like for a database table, your project can have several database table. You can have student database, you can have student table, you can have maybe course table, you can have assessment table, you can have score table, you can have grade table, you can even have maybe payment details table. So each table now stands for, okay, which data do you want to get from the user of your application. So but for now we are dealing with the student data, and for the student data you should know that the information you want to get from the student can varies, and for this you can then come here and say, okay, now don't forget it's just a database table. Now for our database table, let's now go ahead to create our model. Now once you create your model, you go the class. To create your model, you go the class, and the class, the name of the table, which in this case I'm calling students. So student, we are going to confirm minutes later, so which in this case I'm calling a student. And in because you are defining this as a model, you should then go models dot model think issues. So we have our class. Now we have our model students, which is going to be the name of our table. So for the students, what are the parameters you expect to get from the student? Of course, you should expect to get your first name, maybe first name, and you define what you want the first name to be. Models dot character feed. If you have installed Python for your VS Code, you see different options of what you can call your models. You can see date feed, you can see date time feed, you can see decimal feed, and so you can see email feed. It depends on what on the deck on the record you want to get. But for a first name, you expect some set of alphabets and the like. So that's why we're going to be defining our model as character feed. And you can also define the length too. Okay, I don't expect more than this length. Of course, you should not expect a typical name to be more than maybe 50 characters. So you can just define your maximum length to be possibly 50. So and you can also define the last name of the student too. Last name, these are the records you expect the student to supply you anytime they are dealing with your application. So we'll go the models dot character feed, and you can see different all these types of feed you can get from your user in Django documentation if you want more based on your predefined need. So we go the max length again. So let's define our max length to also be 50 in this case. So that we see another type of other types of character other types of models that we can get. Let's say we want to get the age of the students. So the age in this case, we have the models, and for age you don't expect age to be an alphabet. You expect age to be a number. Maybe the student age is 12, the student age is 18. Now you just go the integer feed. So integer feed, let's just leave that for now. We can also set validators for our models, but okay, let's just go and see. Okay, maybe you don't expect see maybe you are designing your application for maybe university students. You don't expect a university student to be less than age 14. So you can just say, okay, you can set some validators for your feed, so that you just set your validators. And to set your validators, you should come to this you should come and import that module from Django.call dot validators. And what do you need from the validators? You can import minimum value validator, and you can also import maximum value. Of course, you see maximum length validator too, but that max length to have do that for us. But let's see maximum value validator. So now we can set validators for our model feed. So you can say validators, and you set the validators to be an array. And for the array, you can set series of validators for this particular feed. which is under model student. So we can set our minimum value validator to, okay, since you are designing an application, maybe the application is for university students, it should, we are not expecting university students to be less than 14 years of age. So I say the minimum value validator is 14, and I can also set the maximum value. Of course, we don't expect anybody to be more than 100 years. We can set on it. So anytime the user is entering some values for this feed, if they enter something like, maybe, some user can be very funny and they can decide to maybe enter -10 for their age. Of course, no age should take -10. So this feed will definitely not accept that. So it's just a way of you protecting your database from wrong entries from the user. So I think let's just look at one more feed. So we have looked at character feed, we have looked at integer feed. So let's look at one more entry as before we proceed. We have boolean feed, we have date feed, and so on and so forth. But as time goes on, we'll be seeing other examples. So let's look at the student email. Of course, you want to take the email address of the student. So models, and in this case, before we have seen email feed. So we define the email feed and we just leave this. So if the user enter anything that is not email, then this particular feed will not accept it. This particular feed will not accept it. So now that we have our models defined, now it's now time for us to run our migration. Now, when you have defined your model, migration is just a way of you saving the model and committing it to the database. So you have defined it at the user end. Creating a migration is now a way of you, okay, I've created this application. Now I want to save it to the database so that my database will take that structure. My database will take that form of validation. Now, the first thing after you have defined your model, to save your migration, you then go py. It's still the same thing, it will still do the same thing. So let's just do py and we go manage.py and we go make migration so that we create our migration and confirm that the model we have created is the same with what we will get before we now commit the database, before we now commit the changes to the database. Now we have make our migration, student management. Okay, so you can see that I'm actually getting an error here, and of course it's normal for you to get an error as a programmer, but it's also good I show you how I'm able to troubleshoot the error and how I'm able to arrive at the solution, at the working solution. Now I told you need to register your application for the project. Now you look at it, I actually called the application under the project as student management, but when I was registering it, you can see that I misspelled the student management. So that was why it's telling me here that there's no module name student management. So you can see that the spelling I got there is the same spelling that I gave when I was installing the application, but the name I actually called the application is different, which is actually a correct spelling. So let's go ahead now and correct our mistake. So you should pay attention to details so that you not give yourself too much problem as a programmer. So you save it now. So now that you have saved it, let's now run the migration again. Let's now run the migration again. Now you can see now that there's no error again because our problem has been solved. Now we have our migration. Once you make the migration, you can then come to this migrations folder and you will see that you have your first migration. Now you can just check and be sure that, okay, this is what I've defined. You can see that it will create a model, and the name of that model, which is a database table in simple term, is student. And you can see that for that student table, you have your feed as ID. This ID is automatically generated for you as your primary key feed, which will be automatically generated. So the first one will be 1, the second will be 2. So it will be unique for every record that is saved in this database. So you have your ID, and another feed is your first name, which is what you define, and you gave it a character feed and max length of 50, and last name and the age and the email based on what we have defined. You can see that we set some extra validation for the age feed, and you can see that even in the migration it is also reflecting, and for your email feed the same thing too. So but you look at it that for the email feed we did not set any maximum length, so Django just take discretion of setting the maximum length to be 255 characters. So that is also good. Of course, we don't expect any write email to be more than 255 characters. Now that we have been able to create our migrations, so we have seen and we have confirmed, okay, this migration is the right thing that we want to do. So we then go ahead and commit it to our database. And to commit it to our database, all we just need to do is just do py or Python. For short, you can just say py or py. So manage.py, and after that we then migrate. So this we commit to the database our changes. You can see that this is actually much because Django has some pre-built functionalities that there's also a migration for. So apart from the migration that we created, there are some pre-built functionality that is shipped with Django, and that is why the migration that we are running is this much. Because so subsequently, when we are running another migration or we are committing to our database, it will not be this much. But because this is the first time that we are running this migration for this application, that is why it is that much. So now, after you have committed this to your database, you see something I want you to pay attention to, and that is this particular db.sqlite3. Of course, this come also as part of functionality of Django. So now this is, so since we have committed that, and because we don't have any database connected to application, Django automatically creates for us this SQLite database, which is called db.sqlite3. Now, to see the changes that we have made to our record or to our database, I want you to just see it in action. And as we go to this particular online SQLite view, of course, if I open this particular application, it's not going to be showing because by default VS Code will not show, will not make it possible for you to view an SQLite file or an SQLite database. So let's go to our online SQLite viewer. So let's just go this. So the so to view your SQLite and to see the changes you are committing to your database, you just come to this SQLite viewer.app, and this is the application, and you are going to be opening the file. Of course, you should know where you saved your file, and for me I saved it in my desktop on my desktop, and I open this, and this is the particular file here. So now you can see, of course, I told you that Python Django comes shipped with some other functionality that we'll possibly be getting to, we are going to be discussing later. But for now, let's just focus on the application that we created under coding school project, so which is student management. Now, for this student management, you can see that under student management you have a model called students, which is what we call our database table. And under the student management table, which is the application, you have the model student. And for, if you look at what we created, it is reflecting in our database, which is the first name field, the last name, the age, the email address, and so on. Okay, like that's all. So now that is it. So subsequently, as we are updating our database, we will be coming here to see our changes. Of course, later you get familiar with some other database like PostgreSQL and so on and so forth. But for now, let's not rush ourselves too much, and let's just limit ourselves to this default SQLite database shipped with Django. Shipped with Django. Alright, now let's look at some hard way or difficult way by which we can add some records to our database. Of course, this is some difficult on hard way, but subsequently we'll be looking at some easy way by which you can do that. But for now, let's just learn the hard way so that we get familiar with how things work on that in the background. So to do that, let's just clean our terminal. Of course, we'll be doing a bit of terminal in this session. So let's just look at our terminal, and we'll go to Python shell to write these commands. And to go to Python shell, you just go your py manage.py, and I was spelling something again, manage.py, and you go to your shell. So this shell allow you to import something in your code, write, do some manipulation, and get something across to your database. So now the first thing we should do here is that we should import our model. Don't forget we are working with model feed, sorry, model student. So you can just say student from student management, the name of the application called my student management, and under models I want to import model student. I want to import model student. So with that we can be able to manipulate and see some things from our database. Now for now, let's now see if we have any record in our data. Of course, we have confirmed from our web application that there's no record in our database at the moment, but let's just confirm by saying student dot object dot object. Of course, your record in database is saved as objects. So if you now import all, or if you now call all, it will now be saved, or it will now send it to you as an array of objects. Array of objects is just like, okay, you have an array as the parent, and as the element of the array you now have objects. And when we talk about objects is just set of key value pairs. Like you have key, which is the name of the feed, and the value, which is the value attached to that particular row of the record. So it's very simple. So we go the object dot all, and we can see now that we have our query set and we don't have any record in the database. Now let's now try to add record to the database by just saying student. Of course, don't forget we have imported the model. If you want to do this, maybe you close the shell. To close the shell, you just go exist, and you open your bracket and you close the bracket. That will close the shell. But for now, let's not close the shell. So if you close the shell and you want to start this again, you should not just jump to student.object.all. You should import the model again and go the route of student.object.all. Now we have seen that we don't have any. I told you that it's going to be an array of objects, but for now it's only sending back to us an array because we don't have any record in our database. So let's save some record in our database, and we'll go and confirm from the web application, and we also come here also to query the record. Now let's go the student, let's attach student to be equals to the name of the model, and we go the name of the model, and in the name of the model, don't forget that our feed name is first underscore name, and let's just call the first name to be John, and we put a comma. You can either use a single, like a double inverted comma, or single. It will still do the same thing, but just make sure you are consistent with whatever is it that you are using. So we go the last name. Don't forget you should follow the way you define it. You should not, like for example, now look at the way I wrote my last name. I wrote last underscore name. So I should not come here and now say last name. It will not work. It will not work. So you should pay attention to details anytime you are doing anything like this. So the last name, we can then say do, and we also have a feed age. Of course, you don't need to put any data type that is not a string. You don't need to put it in a quote or in an inverted comma. You just write it like that. So the age feed can then be 40. I don't know, but it's fine, 40. And we also go the email. Email will just be, let's just say do at gmail.com. Do at gmail.com and you close your model. So if you enter now, you forget a comma. Yeah, you see that we have an error because if you look at it here, after defining this feed I put a comma. After defining this feed I omitted a comma, so that is why it is giving me the error. So even if you run into an error, you should not panic. Just look at the error message. So the error message will give you a clue or an idea of what went wrong with your code. So let me just be lazy this time around and just do a copy and paste. So let's just copy and paste. So I'll just go to where I have the issue. Just scroll your cursor and add the comma. So you put enter. Now you see that the code is fine now. So now we have created the student. Let us now go ahead to save it. So you then call the student and save save it. So you press enter. Now this has actually saved the record to the database, but just to confirm, let us call the student dot objects objects dot all again. And now you can see that you have your query sets and you have your students object one, but I don't actually like the way this is describing our parameters. So let's confirm from our online database first if what we added to the database is actually reflecting in our database. So let's just refresh this. I believe you have this open already, so just go ahead and refresh it. Of course, I want to resume viewing it, and I want to view the file. You can see now that I have my John Doe age 40 and the email address as doe@gmail.com. So meaning that our record was successfully saved. Now, of course, if you want to save like 1,000 records in your database, you should not go that route. Of course, you can look through and save it in database, but it's better when you use a user interface to save the record, which we are going to be looking at. But let's just see the working principles of this for now. Now, there's something I want you to see in action, and which is our the way this query set is being defined. You see that it's just saying student object one, which is not actually descriptive enough. Now to make it descriptive, you just define your string under the model. You define the string under the model, which we give a description of okay how you want the model to be defined or how you want it to be explained. So just go dev, which is a way of defining a function, and there's a built-in function called string or str. So I don't want to go the shortcuts, so let's just type it out. So string, and we call the self, which the self in here means the model itself. So call the model, and anytime this model is being called, instead of just having some random student object one two or anything, you just define what you want, the description that you want to give to the particular model. And to do that, you just say return format. Of course, this f is short form for format, and you format the string as self. Okay, let me just define self dot first name. So I think I just leave it like that. It's fine. So let's see it in action. So we can python manage .py, and let's now do shell. Yes, shell. I told you that once you close your shell and you open it again, the you should import your model again, or your model feed again. And to do that, all you just need to do is you say from your application name, which is student management dot models. Let's import students, which is the name of the tab name. Now we have it imported. Now let's now do query, or let's now do student. Oh, why am I spelling things wrongly? Student dot object dot all. So you now see that instead of us to have some student again, object and one, you see that we have the first parameter student, and because we define this string to be first name, so it's instead of it to be returning object one, object two, object three, it's now giving us a description of okay, the first record I'm seeing here, it's the name of the student. So we can go ahead and add more records. Of course, I've seen how to add more records. Let's just go ahead and add one more. So you just go the same way. Or should I just copy and paste? Let me just type it. Don't be lazy. First name. I do John. Okay, let me do James this time around. I did John the other time. Put the comma. Don't forget your comma this time around. And the more you code all these things, let me say James do. The more you can be James at gmail.com. So Let's now go ahead. Saving, let's see it in our database. So subsequently we will be looking at how to update the data and how to delete data. In even you can even update the model, which is the structure of the data. But for now, before we leave the inserting and the querying, of course, anytime you learn anything in programming, you should look at how to create, how to read, how to update, and how to delete. So we have been able to look at creating, and we have been able to look at read. We have been able to query the data that we created. So subsequently, we look at how to update and how to delete both the data and the model. The data is the record we are adding, and the model is the structure of the data. That is the feeds and the definition of the format that you want the data to take. So now let's look at the last form of querying our data. Of course, we have looked at student.object.all. So you can also add another parameter here, which is the values, and this will get you the values of the data. You can see here that we have a query set, which is the format of the database, and you have your, let me just increase this. You have your first objects. I told you it will be an array of objects, the first objects, and the key here is your ID, and the value is 1. The next key is first name, and the value is John. The next key is last name, and the value is 2. The next key is age, and the value is 40. The next key is email, and the value is 2 at gmail.com, and the same thing. So even if you have 1000 records, you are going to be having it this way. So in the next set we are going to be looking at how to update your data, how to delete your data, and how to update your model. But this is the hard way. Subsequently, we also look at how to use the admin interface to do all these things without having to write on the command line. Of course, it can be difficult writing on the command line, but it's better using the interface.